Brilliance Audio presents Still in Love by Michael Downing. Performed by George Newbern. By mid-morning, a steady wind was sweeping the last of the snow showers north of Mark Sternum's house in Ipswich. He glanced out his kitchen window and nodded, grateful for the improving conditions. For most people in New England, this blustery Wednesday in January was just another winter day. But for Mark and the other adherents of the Hellman College academic calendar, it was the first day of the spring semester. He turned his gaze back to his computer screen and checked his word count for the zillionth time. He spent the last hour reading and rereading the short story he had written, lopping off words to pare it down to size. As far as he knew, the professor had not concocted a revised version of the assignment, and Mark hoped his colleague wouldn't come up with any last-minute inspirations. Although they'd co-taught the creative writing workshop for 10 years and were both tenured, Mark still deferred to the professor in almost all substantive matters. Details were Mark's domain. He clicked through his creative writing files and printed 30 copies of the assignment for today's class, the first of the new semester. Technical Exercise 1. The challenge is to write a story that fulfills the premise outlined in the scenario. Scenario. There is a man in a room. There is a door, a window, and a chair in the room. Another man comes to the door. He says, "I'll be with you in a few minutes. Please don't open the window." He leaves. He returns. The window is open. Assume that readers know nothing. Your story begins as the second man returns and sees that the window is open. But readers will need to understand that he had previously told the man in the room not to open the window. Technical limits. 1. No more than 250 words. Along with your name, please put the word count on your story. 2. Past tense. 3. Third-person narration. The perspective can be limited or omniscient, and don't worry if you don't understand the distinction, which we will review and discuss later in class. The idea is simply to use the convention of a narrator who is not a character in the story. There was one additional technical limit in Mark's version of this assignment, but the professor wasn't convinced it served the story, so, much as Mark loved it, he decided to drop it. For now. He could always change his mind and add it back in later. Mark had written the original version of this and every assignment as well as the syllabus, and he'd selected the readings, prepared the handouts, and scheduled the sequence of workshops. Mark alone would bother to learn the names of the students, ask them about their previous experiences as writers and their expectations for the course, squander a few minutes before class talking to them about the latest horror or hilarity that had streamed onto campus via YouTube, and spend hours every week with them in his office, reviewing the finer points of syntax and grammar and discussing the tentative revisions they made to the first and second and 11th draft of stories they were not eager to resubmit to the public workshop process, until they were confident the new draft would be welcome news to the professor. All of this, in fact, everything except the completed stories students wrote, was minutiae, trivia, inadmissible evidence in the court of the professor. Mark didn't know if their division of labor was fair, or if the professor's insistence on the strict separation of writing from writer was revolutionary or reactionary. But each of them seemed to think he'd got the better of the bargain. It was the professor who'd persuaded Mark to join the creative writing program at Hellman when it was launched a decade ago. Enrollment in each workshop would be capped at 12, and they'd be dividing the workload. Even so, the prospect was not initially appealing. Mark had spent almost 20 years at McClintock College in Boston, not teaching creative writing. In fact, he'd voluntarily taught 4 sections of basic skills and composition every semester just to avoid the inane task of reading original short stories written by students, who reliably asked if the novels on the reading list were fiction or nonfiction. His one interview at Hellman was conducted by Althea Morgan, the diminutive chair of English, whose speech was inflected with a mild Jamaican lilt that made everything she said sound offhand, including her admission that she was counting on the new content-free writing courses to raise her department's sagging popularity. Having written his doctoral dissertation on metaphoricity in Melville, Mark felt eminently qualified to teach nothing. But wasn't the job of teaching young people how to make something of nothing better left to the world's great religions? Althea reminded him that he'd be required to teach only 2 courses per